Welcome everyone, this is Javier Fernández presenting his PhD thesis entitled Towards Industrial Decarbonization, Sustainable Transition by CO2 Utilization Technologies, supervised by Professor Ángel Javier and Dr. Antonio Domínguez. To fulfill the requirements of the international mention and the PhD program, I will be presenting the introduction in Spanish and the chapters of motivation, results and conclusion in English. La presente tesis doctoral se ha realizado en la Universidad de Cantabria, en el Departamento de Ingeniería Química y Biomolecular, en la Escuela Técnica Superior de Ingenieros Industriales y de Telecomunicación, dentro del programa de doctorado en Ingeniería Química de la Energía y de Procesos, y dentro del grupo de investigación de desarrollo de procesos químicos y control de contaminantes de EPA. La tesis se ha visto enmarcada dentro de 2 proyectos nacionales de concurrencia competitiva y ha contado con la financiación de un contrato predoctoral FPV. Además, para optar al reconocimiento internacional se realizó una estancia de investigación predoctoral durante 3 meses en Suiza y se cuenta con la evaluación positiva de 2 expertos internacionales, la doctora Ana Inés Torres y el doctor Seyed Mansouri, que es además miembro del Comité de Valor. Por tanto, voy a dar comienzo a la exposición de la motivación de la presente tesis con una breve exposición de los resultados alcanzados durante ella y unas breves conclusiones y perspectivas futuras. So, first of all, I would like to start highlighting the critical moment that humanity is living on. On the plot, we can see the average temperature on planet Earth during the last 400,000 years and how humanity started its development 200,000 years ago during the period called the Pleistocene. We have to survive a glacial period and we were able to reach our main revolution, the Neolithic, which allowed human societies to prosper and to start some taming and farming procedures. This period, known as the Holocene, was characterized by a much more stable temperature between -1 and +1 Celsius degrees, which Professor Rostrom called the corridor of life, and a stable temperature that allowed human societies to grow and prosper. Precisely because of that, we were able to achieve our second major revolution, the industrial one, which brought a huge innovation landscape of all different technologies that increase a lot all socioeconomic and welfare indicators such as poor population, GDP, or the use of energy and water. However, this growth was coupled with a linear economy model and the use of fossil resources, and this led to an unprecedented release of different problems such as greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide or methane, and other environmental issues. Because of this, we are now living in a new era, an era where humanity is able to change the planet at a world scale. This is what is called the Anthropocene. Precisely because of these emissions, of greenhouse gas emissions, we were able to modify the composition in the atmosphere and change the temperature of the planet to more than 1 Celsius degrees, something never seen in the last 10,000 years. And if climate projections are met and we keep increasing the temperature of the planet, we will reach more than 2 Celsius degrees by the end of the century, something never seen in the history of the planet. So to tackle this problem, we first need to understand where the anthropogenic emissions are coming from, and in 2021 they were about 50 gigatons of CO2 equivalent emissions in the global scale, coming from different sectors such as the transportation, the agriculture, the buildings, or the industry. Precisely, the industry is a critical sector with almost a third of the whole carbon budget in the planet Earth, with some emissions coming from the energy and some emissions coming from the process. While the energy emissions could be tackled by certain decarbonization alternatives related with renewable energies or the production of low carbon heat, there is also some intrinsic emissions related with the reactions of the industry, which are called the hard-to-abate emissions. One possible solution could be the carbon capture and storage technologies, which would sequester the CO2 and avoid its release into the atmosphere. But however, given the problem of the linear economy model and the use of fossil resources, we have the opportunity to use this carbon dioxide into the production of value-added chemicals in the so-called carbon capture and utilization approaches. There are different conversion alternatives for the conversion of the CO2 into these products, and while some of them are at a higher maturity level, such as the biological or chemochemical approaches, others, such as the electrochemical, photochemical, photoelectrochemical ones, are a more emerging state. This thesis has been focused on the electrochemical approach, which is a very promising alternative for the production of different C1 and C2 products such as methane, ethylene, or formic acid, which also, by other intermediate processes, could lead to longer hydrocarbons, such as diesel or olefins. The basis of the electrochemical reduction is that we have two main raw materials, water and carbon dioxide, that are fed into our CO2 electrolyzer. This electrolyzer is composed of mainly three components. The cathode, where the CO2 reduction takes place for the production of different gas and liquid products. The anode, where the water oxidation reaction occurs, splitting the water molecule into hydrogen, electrons, and oxygen, and also a certain power source for catalyzing the reaction rate at a certain level. So while the electrochemical reduction has some benefits, such as its modularity, flexibility, or being able to operate at mild operating conditions, there are quite doubts about its real feasibility in terms of both environmental and economic viewpoints. And it's precisely because of that we need tools to assess this technology and try to understand which potential role to play in the coming future. For doing that, we need process system engineering tools, and they are going to be based on models. Models able to describe reality based well on an empiric approach, describing what is happening at with observations of the real phenomena, or well with a mechanistic approach, trying to describe by certain equations the phenomena happening in the system. In any case, the idea is to go from the experimental research at the lab scale state into a higher implementation level. First, by doing a process modeling of the electrochemical system, then assessing the system with an economic and environmental viewpoint, and finally go into an optimization to try to find which variables could be more critical for reducing the environmental and economic indicators. This could allow to the final potential scale and implementation of this emerging technology. So in the research group of Professor Angel Irabian, there is a huge expertise in the electrochemical field, and several PhD theses have been published in the recent years. First, with Isabel Garcia for the production of polycarbonates, also Ivan Merino with production of different products such as methane and ethylene, Andres del Castillo for the production of formic acid, Guillermo Diaz also continuing with the line of formic acid production, and finally Aitor Marcos for the membranes and Javier Fernández for the anodic reaction gave a huge expertise into the experimental side of the CO2 electrochemical reduction. And now this is the first thesis within the group that tries to optimize the process and see the process not from the experimental side, but rather from the process system side, trying to understand the role and the prospects of the electrochemical reduction in the decarbonization of the economy. So our hypothesis is that electrochemical processes could help to decarbonize the economy in this context of hard-to-abate emissions in the industry under certain conditions and scenarios. For doing the assessment, we will try to find specifically which developments, which conditions are needed in this CO2 electrochemical system to produce competitive CO2-based products, and see the implications on the long term if we switch towards this CO2-based production. First, we will analyze the feasibility of the CO2-based products in an isolated manner. We will then go into an integration within the industry, and finally, we will try to see a prospective outlook on how electrochemical processes would help in decarbonizing the economy.